Hello, Dinara.
Hi, James.
Welcome back, everybody. So today we're going to be looking at a little bit more of grammar today. So today we're looking at the present simple tense. Okay, so very, very commonly used tense in English. So to give you an example, Alex is a bus driver, but now he is in bed asleep. He is not driving a bus because he's asleep. So he is not driving a bus. That's the present continuous that we talked about last time. So he's not doing that right at the second because he's asleep. And I remember we discussed this last time. This is a classic example of a stative verb. Okay, so he is in bed asleep. Because it just describes his state. So sleeping itself is an action. You can say he's sleeping, but so sleeping itself is an action, but he is in bed asleep. That's right. So that's how it is basically. Exactly. So we've got Alex is a bus driver. He is not driving a bus, but he drives a bus, and so generally because he's a bus driver. And all of these examples, they're in the present simple. And just remember with the present simple, for I, we, you, or they just stay the same, apart from the verb be, obviously. For he, she, and it, you need to add an S afterwards. So he drives, she works, it does, etc. Whereas I drive, we work, you do, they do. Okay? So we use this tense to talk about things in general. We use it to say that something happens all the time or repeatedly, or that something is true in general. So the examples here: nurses look after patients in hospitals. I usually go away at weekends. The earth goes round the sun. The cafe opens at 7:30 in the morning. We say I work, but he works. They teach, but my sister teaches. You go, but it goes. I have, but he has. Okay? So that's the important thing. And when you're talking about questions, forming questions and negatives, we need to use the auxiliary verb do, which obviously for he, she, and it is does. So for example, do I work? Do we drive? Do you do? Do they work? Or does he work? Does she drive? Does it do? Or does it work? And the same for the negative. So I don't work, we don't drive, you don't work, they don't do, he doesn't work, she doesn't drive, it doesn't do. So you look at these examples here. I come from Canada. Where do you come from? I don't go away very often. What does this word mean? As a side point, I would actually say that's one of the most common mistakes I hear is what means, so what does this word mean? Very mistake.
Or just what does it mean?
Yeah, exactly. Or what does it mean? Exactly. And then rice doesn't grow in cold climates. In the following examples, do is also the main verb. Do you do? Doesn't do, etc. So what do you do? I work in a shop. He's always so lazy, he doesn't do anything to help. We use the present simple to say how often we do things. So I get up at 8 o'clock every morning. How often do you go to the dentist? Julie doesn't drink tea very often. Robert usually goes away 2 or 3 times a year. I promise, I apologize, etc. Sometimes we do things by saying something. For example, when you promise to do something, you can say, I promise. When you suggest something, you can say, I suggest. So, for example, I promise I won't be late. We can't say I'm promising because it's a stative verb. You either do it or you don't. Okay. What do you suggest I do? I suggest that you blah, blah, blah. And in the same way, we say, I apologize, I advise, I insist, I agree, I refuse. So, exactly. Yeah, and just to give a very brief overview, this is for things that these are for habits. You use this tense for habits, routines, and facts. So things that are generally true. Yeah. you don't use it for things that are happening right now, unless you're describing a state.
Okay, and why do we sometimes add just s, and sometimes we add to verbs es?
It depends what the ending is, basically. So if you have it ending with an e, then you have to add an s to the end. So it's got es. Arrives. He arrives, for example. There it's an es. When you have consonant and then y, you need to change the y to an I, and then you need to add es. So that's a very common one. But it's consonant then y. So she studies, but he plays. Okay, is without, you don't do that with he plays because it's vowel then y. So he plays is just ys at the end. She studies is ies at the end. So that's the most common time that you would have it, if the verb ends with an e, you simply add an s. I mean, there are other ones where, as in there are other consonant clusters where you need one added at the end. And that's especially when it's to do with needing an extra syllable for the pronunciation. So, for example, finishes, watches. So he watches television, he watches football. She finishes, so she finishes the cookies, whatever, or she finishes, so she finishes is not the best example. Finish is not the best example because all of the examples coming in my head would be better in the present continuous. But so when you have it ending with certain consonants, you can hear that you need an extra syllable. Okay? So, the examples off the top of my head are ch, ch, as in, so ch, for example, or sh, or x as well. It would be some good examples. And I think also zz as well. You would need to add one. So buzzes. So the bee buzzes. You can't say the bee buzz. It's too difficult. It's too difficult to move between those two without adding an extra vowel. So I think a lot of it is related to pronunciation. That's the reason for it. Unless, of course, you see this, as in if you see this consonant, then a y, then you change it to ies. But not vowel, then a y. That's important.
Guys, sometimes we use present simple and present continuous to express the future. In the future lessons, we will study this. And James, what are common mistakes of your students who use present simple?
I would say that using it in cases where you're supposed to use the present continuous is a very common mistake, because like we said last time, so many languages don't have this distinction between continuous tense. They don't have the progressive or continuous aspect, so that's very, very common. So, I'm working as a train driver. That makes it sound like you're only doing it at the moment, or it's going to be a few weeks or a few months, and then you'll be doing something else. So that's very common, is mixing it up with the present continuous, as in, so using it where you're supposed to use the present continuous. That's one common mistake. Next common mistakes are related to forgetting to use the auxiliary verb, or not using the auxiliary verb in questions or negatives. Because the only verb you don't need an auxiliary for in the present simple tense is be. All the other ones you need it. So I am not a doctor, but I don't work. So I don't work at a hospital, for example. Don't work. So, but I am not a doctor.
And I have another question. For example, sometimes I can hear that these auxiliary verbs, do and does, they're used in affirmative sentences. For example, yes. I do love you. He does study a lot. Why do we say?
Emphasis. Mostly it's emphasis. So the thing is that, this is another common, it's not exactly part of the present simple, but I was going to say, so very, very common when you've got these short yes or no questions. Yes, I do. No, I don't. So lots of people, you will, for example, do you have a car? Yes, I have. That's a very common mistake as well. That one I forgot to, but it's not, it's a specific part of the present simple. When you use it in an affirmative sense that isn't a question, generally it's affirmative. So it's because we don't have a negative yes. So for example, some languages have a negative yes. So when you say something, German, for example, has doch, so when you say, oh, you don't like that, they have a word that says that is a negative yes. Actually, I do, so it's quite common if somebody says something about you that is in a negative form, like for example, oh, you don't sing though. I do sing, so that's an example. Oh, I do sing. And you might even hear it, and that's the most common one, is for, and also something, so it's usually to negate a negative form would be, you don't love me. I do love you, so as in this is how it tends to be used. It's for emphasis. And you can use it for emphasis as well when you're not negating. Oh, I do love a bit of cake every now and again. Some chocolate cake every now and again. So it's for emphasis mostly.
I can see. Very interesting. Okay, especially about common mistakes. For example, I remember myself when I finally started speaking English, not just reading and writing. My common mistake was I forgot S endings. Instead of saying he likes, I in the past said he like.
Yes, yeah,
I still make this mistake, which you mentioned today. Do you like chocolate? Sorry, do you have chocolate? Yes, I have.
Yes.
I do this mistake myself still. So these details are very important, especially when you prepare for exams, guys. And let's say English will be, in my opinion, will always be the international language, and better you know it, obviously more competitive you'll be in the market. Very interesting. Thank you, James. And guys, see you in our next episode. We are going to compare present continuous and present simple. And who needs more, first of all, especially speaking practice, so we welcome you to our school. All the information about our school is below this video. Please share these videos with your friends who study English. We do it, let's say, my dream is more people to know 3 international, let's say, mostly spoken languages as English, Spanish, and Chinese. Bye.
Bye. See you next week.